Really wonderful to see the entire community participating in this together over dinner. And in that spirit, we decided to have a fireside chat with Dr. Jeff Sutherland. We'll be very brief in the introduction so we can get into the discussion. We'll spend about 20 minutes having a conversation and then get to quick Q&A. But before we kick off, it's already been an incredible 2 days with lots of themes on this concept of Agile. What does it mean? The pace of change that's taking place in business. It's no longer big beating small in industry. In the old days, if you're a giant company, you could squash a new startup. Today it's fast beating slow. And in that spirit of fast beating slow, your ability to respond and change is key. One consistent theme so far, early in the program, is that the name Dr. Jeff Sutherland seems to come up a lot, not by design, by coincidence. And so it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Jeff Sutherland here, Jeff as he likes us to call him. Over the course of the conversation, we're going to unpack his background and bio. So let's kick off, because we wanted to also place something quite special on the table. So on every table, there is the famous Agile Manifesto. And as we unpack that, let's go back in time, and we're going to kick off from the Agile Manifesto as a point in time. We're then going to go back in time and look at Dr. Sutherland's journey to the Agile Manifesto. We're then going to go forward in time to the developments that are taking place. So let's get back to Snowbird, Utah, 2001.
Yeah, 2001.
Take us through that. This group of folks get together and come up with this. Set the scene. What's going on?
Well, Bob Martin, who is well known in the software community, he's called Uncle Bob, called up a bunch of us and said, hey, we're having this meeting at Snowbird to talk about the future of software development. And he carefully selected a group to show up. At the time, I was CTO of a startup. But it sounded like it was going to be an important meeting. So I went out to Snowbird. We had 17 people there in that meeting, all leaders in software development, well-known thought leaders, all male. My wife was there, but not part of the meetings, but she was in all the social, the dinners, and she said she had never seen so much testosterone in her life. Everybody had their own opinion. It was just constant arguing and debating. And the first day, we talked about the processes that people use. At that time, there were only two processes widely deployed, Scrum and Extreme Programming. And actually, Extreme Programming had more teams out there than Scrum at the time. But the goal of the first day was, first of all, see what everybody was doing, and then see if we could get some agreement, some common agreement, to help direct the future of software development. The big problem at the time was not waterfall. It was the rational unified process. And this was a set of really good practices, but there were so many of them, if you implemented it, it made it very heavyweight and slow. And so the people with the new, more what we came to call agile practices were trying to figure out a way, a spearhead into the software development community that would actually change the direction. So at the end of the day, we had candidates for what we would do in common on the board, and we finally decided on the word agile. And it was based on one of the Scrum guys, Mike Beadle, who was the CEO of the first company that implemented Scrum everywhere, the entire organization, had read a book on hardware development, lean hardware companies. 100 of them had formed what they called an Agile consortium. And they said the difference between lean and Agile is that in Agile, you bring the customer into product development. So in Extreme Programming, they had a customer on the team. Their first project was actually an internal financial system at Chrysler. They had an end user on their development team. Scrum was doing product development for thousands of people, and we had a product owner that was the voice of all these customers. So Agile was based on lean product development. something that people don't get. But we wanted to apply that concept to software. The next morning we came in, people are still arguing and debating, and about 10:30 in the morning we have a coffee break. And 9 of the people in the room go out in the ski slope, and 8 of us stay in the room. That's the picture. I'm in the middle, my back is to the picture. Martin Fowler goes to the whiteboard. You can see him at the whiteboard. He said, I'm really concerned that, we've been here a day and a half, and the only thing we've agreed on is the word agile. I'm really concerned we're going to leave here without agreeing on anything but that word. Is there anything that we can agree on? And he says, what makes great teams? And someone said, well, it's all about the individuals and the way they work together. So he writes individuals and interactions on the board. And we had a tool vendor in the room. He said, what about process and tools? Aren't they important? And most of the rest of us said, well, they usually slow you down. They're usually too heavyweight. They're not, the tools are not, the user interfaces are such that it disrupts your way of working. But other people said, well, we don't want to ban them because they might have some utility. But what we really want to value is the team, the individuals and the way they interact. That's where all productivity comes from. So Martin wrote on the board, we value individuals and interactions over process and tools. And then Ron Jeffries, who's to the right of me in that picture, has a little bit of a pot belly there. He is one of the leading members of the leading founders of extreme programming, who is all about delivering valuable stuff to users on rapid iterations. He said, and we want to value delivery of working. Today we say working product. He said working software. That's the real value, is delivering that working software in short iterations consistently. And then someone said, well, what about documentation? And we said, well, we need some, but we already knew, I had already run an FDA project using Scrum, and I already knew we needed 95% less documentation to get FDA compliance. But we needed that 5%. So we said, okay, we value delivering working software over comprehensive documentation is the way it came out. That led into a longer discussion around involving the customer in product development, which was a really big issue to me because at that time I was still a CTO of what is now called, or I'm not sure exactly the time, I had been CTO of what is now GE Healthcare. And just for our financial systems, we had the 3,000 biggest hospitals in the United States, so they were all screaming. Okay, so how do we get them all involved in a way that they're happier about the product? After a long discussion, it came out, we value customers and collaboration over contract negotiation. So again, it's not that we don't need contracts, but the real value is in the customer collaboration. And then someone from the XP group said, and we value responding to change over following a plan. That was the mantra of XP. And at that point, the coffee break time was up. The other guys came into the room. It was a very interesting moment because it got really silent. It was one of these pregnant moments. And one of the key people, Ward Cunningham, he was at Microsoft at the time. He's the inventor of the wiki and many of the tools that people use in the software industry. Looked at it, he said, that's awesome, and nobody changed a word. So this was written in a coffee break by 8 guys, unedited. If you talk to us now, it's like we felt like we put a note in a bottle, we threw it in the ocean, and everybody read it. Here you are, you're here tonight reading it. Pretty amazing.
Fantastic. From that moment in time, it was written from the software perspective. Thinking has evolved so much since then. How has that journey been, taking it from software, and many people still look at that and think, wow, this is a software element, and they even look at some of the agile methodologies and think that really works in the software world. Any thoughts on that journey, how it expanded now where many organizations are looking at this?
Well, it's never been about software to me. And in 2006, when I founded Scrum Inc., one of the major goals was to move it out of software. But we're going to go back earlier than that. I mean, I don't want to go into the whole stream of events, but one of the things that kicked off the first Scrum team is I was on the President's Advisory Committee for an organization called Axiom, based in Cambridge. They were a micro-enterprise lending group based on the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. And we were lending hundreds of millions of dollars in small loans, like $25 each, to really poor people in mostly South America, who couldn't feed their children. And we were getting amazing results because we built a small team and we work with them so they come up with a business plan. And so maybe a woman might say, if I had 25 bucks, I'd buy a sewing machine. I'm going to start a little small business, making dresses. And then a guy might say, I'll buy some wood, I'll make a fruit cart, I'll sell fruit in town square. When every member of the 4 or 5 person team had a plan, and we said, okay, we're going to loan you $25, and we're going to check in regularly, and when you all pay back your $25, we're going to talk about how to scale your business, and we're going to loan you another $25. And we got amazing results. In a few weeks, women who couldn't feed their children had enough food, and even had extra so they could buy clothes, which was really important because without clothes, the kids couldn't go to school. And as soon as they had clothes, the kids are in school. Now she's scaling her business. In 6 months, some of these women were building a new house. And I had a lunch meeting. I came back to a company I was working with at Easel Corporation, meeting with my team, and I said, you guys, you're always late. You always have too many bugs. Management thinks you're really bad developers. I said, how long has this been going on? And every person from the most junior to the most senior who had decades of experience says, as long as I've been in software development, we've always been late, we've always been under pressure, we've always been working nights and weekends, we've always been bad developers. And I said, do you want to live the rest of your life like that? And they said, no. And I said, well, I have an idea that if we thought about some of the principles around how the micro-enterprise lending teams work, I bet in 6 months we could have so much software, it would be so good in software, that we could, the management would tell us to slow down. The customers would say, it's like drinking from a fire hose. When that happened, we could take back our dignity as people. We could spend time with our families instead of working nights and weekends. Would you like to try it? And fortunately, they said yes. So we might not be here if they hadn't. And sure enough, in 6 months, Scrum was formed, and they were on that delivery cycle. So you could say one of the key threads for Scrum is not about software at all. It's about poor people feeding their kids in South America.
Great segue into the journey that and the things that formed your thoughts and ideas. Take us back. What were some of the formative elements in your journey?
Well, some of you read my book, Software: The Art of Doing Twice Work in Half the Time. I think I start off in there by talking about West Point. One of the things that's not in there is when I came in my first day, first thing you do is shave your head, then you get in line for a physical. So I had my duffel bag, I got my t-shirt, I got my shaved head, and I'm looking at the gym. The Olympic gymnastics team is working out because the coach there was the Olympic coach. And so I'm watching them as I'm standing in line for an hour ready to get a physical. And I decide later that I go out for gymnastics. So for 3 years, every day for at least 3 hours a day, I get up, I was a parallel bars guy, I get up in the parallel bars guy, and one of the Olympic team members would say, not quite right, do it again. For 3 years, it was never quite right. Always do it again. And every once in a while, he would get up on it and do it perfectly to show the gap between me and them. So I learned about continuous improvement. It's all about seeing the gap where you need to be, where you are, and what is the next small step to take you towards the goal. Because he would always say, try this, do a little bit of that. So then, in my last year, when I took over, I became training officer from the worst marching company at West Point. In 3 months, I turned them into the best marching company. And the way I did it, I initially tried some management strategies, like telling them they were bad people, and then having them work overtime. I did all that kind of stuff. But Company L2 had been known as the loose deuce for 100 years. The culture was not going to change with that kind of approach. So I began putting visible on the company bulletin board after every parade. I put, here's what happened in that parade. Here's the points that we lost in priority order. Here's what we need to do next to make a small improvement. And within 3 months, that became the best marching company that probably the Corps of Cadets has ever seen. That was so good that when our most famous graduate, General MacArthur, died, they were selected to bury General MacArthur, which was a really significant honor, and no one has ever forgotten that. So the lesson there was by making work visible in a way that people could see the priorities and seeing what they needed to do next. Teams can self-organize in a very short time to go from the worst team in an organization to the absolute best team. So making work visible and getting people self-organizing, I already learned that at West Point, and I took that into a sports program, and I had always been a good skier. We built a champion ski team that second year using just the same principles on skiing. So when I came out, I went into the Air Force, became a fighter pilot. That's where all the operational aspects of Scrum, in a way, come from. Because the burn down chart is teaching new fighter pilots how to land a high performance jet at the end of the runway. You have to know exactly where you are, and they always do it wrong initially. They come in too high, they have to come around and try it again. The OODA loop, as a fighter pilot we learned John Boyd's OODA loop. John Boyd was the best fighter pilot ever in the history of aerial warfare. It was called 40-second Boyd. He would win every battle within 40 seconds. And he did it by this, what he called the OODA loop. First, you observe, you're looking for the forces, okay? So anytime you're going to do a project or do any initiative, as soon as you try to do something, there's going to be resistance. Some of it will be your competition, sometimes your customers, but also there's internal resistance. There's people are trying to steal your budget, there's people trying to steal your people, and then there's the random factors. Things break, people break. So John said, okay, as soon as you engage, the resisting forces will appear. As soon as you see you're going to reorient, decide to come in at a different angle and come in a way that will disrupt the opposition. As soon as you do that, the opposing forces will try to come around again, but before they can do that, you've cycled around and you're at another angle. So as soon as you get inside the OODA loop of the competition, you win 100% of the time. In fact, there's a great business book called Certain to Win. And this is the basis of the product owner in Scrum, is to be able to execute that OODA loop in business, okay? So, and you have to figure out what you did wrong before you're dead. And to do that, we had a checklist. We had to execute automatically a checklist for almost any major thing that goes wrong in order to survive long enough to have the mental space to figure out what the hell is going on and what do I do. And so this immediate and visceral response, which is really emotional, is part of the Agile movement. Something so to a fighter pilot, that's natural. Something happens and you're going to change immediately. And one of the biggest problems in business today is stuff happens and people are just sitting there like deer in the headlights. And then companies like Nokia are dead within a few years. The #1 company is dead in 4 years. That was slow. It can happen faster now. So understanding this Agile way of working, planning, okay, flying in over North Vietnam. As soon as, either, I can't remember whether it was Eisenhower or Patton, both Air Academy graduates, one of them said is, every plane is shattered with first contact with the enemy. And this is true of your project plan. Now, I work in the venture capital group, and the investors have never seen a Gantt chart that's been correct. In 30 years of business, not a single one of our 7 investors has ever seen a Gantt chart as correct. Yet people are still using these things. What is it with people? They use something that's totally broken and inappropriate, and they keep on doing it over and over again, and they keep on failing over and over again. This makes no sense to a fighter pilot. So when I came out into business, we probably should talk about the medical school, because that came between coming into business. But as soon as I came into business, I was hired in as effectively CTO of a bank running 150 banks all over North America. As soon as I go in there, I notice all the projects are late. I watch what they're doing. They have these big Gantt charts that are filling walls. And the Gantt charts are always wrong, and the projects are always late. And when they're late, the managers have more meetings and more reports, and it makes it even later. So I go into the CEO and I say, Ron, have you noticed all your projects are late? And he said, yeah, every morning 4 CIOs call me up at least, and they scream at me. I said, well, it's not going to get better. These guys, the Gantt chart is a technology invented by the Army Quartermaster Corps before World War I, and they haven't updated it since then. And it's absolutely inappropriate for managing software projects because you can mathematically prove that the probability that one of the tasks of the Gantt chart is going to slide and make the project late is 0.999999. You're certain to be late. That is a tool to make you late. So he says, well, what should we do? I said, well, we need to install a completely new operating system. And I said, we can't do it for the whole bank, so let's take the worst business unit, we'll install it there. And I said, I need everybody, sales, marketing, support, installation, everyone. We'll split them in small teams, 4 or 5 people. I'll teach them how to land a project. I'm going to give them a burn down chart. So just like fighter pilots, everything we prioritize on Monday, we're going to deliver on Friday. And if it's a software upgrade, there's 150 banks that have been upgraded every Friday. And he said to me, well, that's not going to be much fun right now. You're doing all the new technology stuff. He said, it's going to be a big headache. I said, I don't care, this bank needs to be fixed. He said, okay, you got it. So that was the first prototype of Scrum. This was in 1983. And that business unit went from the most money-losing unit, bleeding red ink, to the most profitable business in the bank in 6 months. And it was so profitable, they told me, hey, Jeff, here's another $20 million to throw at whatever you're doing, because that's where the money is. Okay, so the way people have been doing projects is completely wrong. As a fighter pilot, as soon as I came in and looked what they were doing, I was horrified. And fortunately, I was in a position to immediately change it. That then launched more prototypes in several different companies, different technology companies, some big, some small, some startups, until 1993 at Euvin Corporation, we formalized Scrum. So, why don't you, where would you like to go next?
Just great context. But in that experience with teams, we've been touching on a couple of themes over the last 2 days. Misconceptions that come up in the Agile ecosystem. So as an example, one misconception is adding more people to a project that's late usually causes more delays.
Right.
The second is when you're under pressure, work longer and harder, and it would solve itself. And the third element is we spoke about the ideal team size. It would be great to get your thoughts, and we've heard the number 12, it'd be great to get your perspective, starting from the ideal team size. What are some of the lessons that you've drawn on and anecdotes on those?
Okay, so I think we do need to have to go back to the research because Scrum is data-driven. My last tour in the Air Force was when pilots, particularly academy graduates, are in 6 or 7 years. One of the things that they often do is go back and they become a professor at one of the academies. So I signed up for that program. I went back to be a professor of mathematics at the Air Force Academy. And basically, not only became a research scientist, teaching. And after 3 years there, which was a normal tour, I was about to move on. A unique event occurred where they were winding down the Vietnamese War, and I got the opportunity to get out of the Air Force, and at the same time, I was offered a job at the University of Colorado Medical School, where I would come in and be effectively the CIO of the Colorado Regional Cancer Center, which was the 5 biggest hospitals in Colorado. So I decided to do that. I had already begun working on a PhD, and my PhD thesis was on cancer research. And when I was a student there, a well-known physician and statistician, editor of the Journal of National Cancer, John Baylor, came to give a talk. He gave a talk on mammography, and what he showed was data that proved that there were more cancers induced by radiation exposure from mammography exams than there were cured by early detection. That caused a huge uproar. They had to convene they couldn't fire him, they had to convene a blue ribbon panel at the National Cancer Institute. After 6 months, they affirmed that Baylor was totally right. They changed all the protocols, all the radiation standard. When his talk was done, I went up to him, I said, you know, Professor Baylor, I'm just a graduate student here, and I'm writing a thesis, and I'm really concerned. I'm going to spend 5 years writing the thesis. It will just wind up on a library shelf gathering dust. Nobody will read it. Does anybody have one of those? Usually I have somebody that has one. And I said, what you write, everybody reads. Can you help me write something worth reading? And he said, okay, I have a couple of really big problems I've been working on. And one of them, I'm going to send you 300 clinical papers, and every paper has charts and graphs on cancer. Animal studies, human studies, every type of cancer all around the world. Every graph is different. Explain why, and we'll give you your degree. So I said, well, how will they do that? He said, you're a mathematician and computer scientist. You need to model the human cell on the computer. And then you need to show how it changes into a cancer cell. And when you do that, then we'll know how to intervene to reduce the incidence of cancer and also how to better cure cancer. And I said, well, that sounds like a hard problem. He said, well, it is because you're going to have to describe what causes cancer, and nobody agrees. And I said, well, that sounds like an impossible problem. And he said, look, I work with every leading cancer researcher in the world. We will guide you every step of the way. We need someone to do the work. Are you willing to do the work? So I just said yes. I was buried in the medical school library for 6 months, another 6 months coding before I could first run the first program. When I ran, it was those days, probably most of you don't remember, that when we used to have punch cards. You used to have to punch stuff in cards. Then you take the card deck to the operations center. Anybody remember that? Some of you were old enough. Then you go back into your office, you wait for an hour until you got a report printing out your results. So I come back to my office, I'm waiting all of a sudden the faculty is running into my office saying, Sutherland, you just used a third of the computer science budget for the department for the year on one program running one time. You can never run that program again. I will not describe what happened after that, but the results showed clearly that cancer occurs in 4 steps. And that is the current model of cancer today. Now, why is that important? To understand that, you have to understand complex adaptive system theory. And that systems, like the human cell, go through sets of stable states because of certain interventions. And by having the right intervention, it can go into a more negative state. The cell case become a cancer cell. But we also found we could take a cancer cell and turn it back into a normal cell. So that means any complex adaptive system, by small iterative changes, you can move it into any state you want. So Scrum is designed to be a scientific experiment. We ask every day, what change can we make to make this team be more effective at achieving the sprint goal today? And every retrospective we ask, at a deeper level, how can we change the way the team works? And if you're running 1-week sprints, that's 272 scientific experiments that you get to run every year. And if you do them, you will wind up with awesome teams. Okay, so the fundamentals of Scrum came out of cancer research. Now, why is research important? Because everything about Scrum is based on research. And on team size, the research says, one data point, 491 teams doing the same size projects with different team sizes. 6-people teams take 11 months. How long do you think 10-people teams take to do the same project? What do you think?
20.
Not 20, 17. That means you can never have a 10-person team because you'll cause half a year delay in your project. And yet there are still people out there that have 10-person teams. I can't believe it. They can do their own research and test it, within a few sprints in their organization, but they don't. People won't believe the science. Now, there is a Harvard professor who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, who's written a book on teams. And he said the optimal team size averages 4.6 people. So the right number is 4 or 5. It's smaller than what's in the Scrum Guide. I've been trying to get Ken to get that number down lower. But I don't think he's really studied the data. Yeah. So your team size, you want about 4 or 5 people. And you can test that. You can have a team of 4 meeting every day. Feels like you're talking around the water cooler. 5, pretty similar. As soon as you get to 6, it's a little more awkward. By the time you get to 7, it's hard for everybody to talk. By the time you get to 8, it's really painful. So at Scrum Inc., we don't allow teams of 9. Now, the problem is in organizations, people want to clump together, okay? They always say, oh, we're gonna need help from that person over there, we won't be able to do our work. Also, if we clump together, nobody's accountable, right? I can stay hidden if we're clumped together. So they always want to clump together. So I found one of the biggest management problems is to actually break that. And the way I did it at Scrum Inc., I said, okay, if you want teams of 9 or more, you can do it, but those teams don't get any salary that month. And surprisingly, we've never had a team.
We want to build up to Q&A and get to Q&A, but before we can dig into some of these themes. Before we get to Q&A, I want to take a little side path, because over the next few days we're going to meet teams that will be digging deeper into the automotive industry, etc. I just want to share an anecdote that you are a huge fan of Tesla. You have a number of Teslas. In fact, I think one of the original models
Yeah.
of Tesla. It'd be great, to tell us about that. Why the passion for Tesla? But more importantly, I was at a conference once and spoke to one of the large we'll leave the name out, German motor manufacturers, and I mentioned the word Tesla, and it was as though I said the worst possible thing to them. They got really, really upset.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the word agile, and they mentioned Tesla is not agile. Now we may hear from others that think Tesla is not agile, but what are your thoughts on Tesla, on agile?
Okay. Well, last year we did a week-long set of training at Tesla. Back, I think it was 2009, 2010. I mean, Tesla was really shaky then. But I had heard about them even in 2003, and I was out in Palo Alto, and they had just opened their new showroom. So I went down there. He said, "Hey, if you put $5,000 down, you can take it out and drive it around, and you can get your money back if you don't want to buy it." So I said, "Sure." So I took it out around Portola Valley, the California foothills. Had a great time. And when I came back, I signed up. People told me I was crazy. My wife was a minister at a church. And she said, "You can never bring that car to church." But actually what happened was I brought it to church, and everybody was really interested in it. It's the only car that wasn't burning gas, generating fumes, helping to fund the oil wars. They all thought it was great. And not too long after Tesla went public, I got as much feminist family stock as I could get. And I even topped up a little more when they went public. And that stock today, I got it at 17. Tesla hit about 550. That stock today is going to buy me as many Teslas as I want for the rest of my life. And some of them I've even given away. So it was really a good investment. So as soon as they came out with the Model S, of course, I signed up for that. A year later, I got the Model S. The Model S is awesome. I think I'm on my 5th Model S. My wife has a Model 3. Now, I train all the automobile manufacturers, Toyota, BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen. They are all trying to get agile as fast as possible. But Tesla is extremely disruptive. They have some Scrum internally, and the people doing it want more Scrum because it is a bit of a high-pressure environment. Elon thinks everybody should work 80 hours a day. You could actually get more done by working a normal work week if you had implemented Scrum well. But even without Scrum, the company is extremely lean. They have Scrum, and every 2 weeks, my Tesla operating system is upgraded. And no other automobile manufacturer in the business can do that. Not only that, on a regular cadence, about a quarterly basis, Tesla is upgrading major components of the car. The car is constantly evolving. That's why I've had 5 Model S's. Everyone is different, everyone is better, yeah.
Can we kick off this?
Go.
Just on Tesla, it seems like the antithesis of, it's a very fast-moving company. They opened the China plant in a record period of time. But we hear about the customer has to be part of the team, and here it is, Elon Musk's idea of what a car should be. There is no customer that's involved in designing a Tesla, at least my understanding. So how do you reconcile, surely they're fast, but it doesn't fit the customer involved in product development and repeated iteration kind of agile model that we're hearing?
Tesla is the only company where a user can send a tweet to Elon and they will get new functionality in that car. So for example, people were complaining about the Google Maps of the Tesla. The Google Maps on the iPhone was getting better. And Elon tweeted back, "It's really hard to change, it's kind of monolithic, we're going to have to take it apart, it's going to take a little bit of a while." In less than a year, that thing came out with a new release that's as good as Waze.
But it's still top down, right?
Yeah, it is a bit top-down. But all I can say is Tesla is more responsive to customer input than any other automobile company. And it's largely because Elon insists on responding to customers. If you look at the sales of the Model 3, it looks like the iPhone sales. You know, at Tesla, they say it was their iPhone moment when they demoed the Model 3 and they got 450,000 people signed up and $400 million in the bank, just from a web page telling them to sign up.
I understand that. I understand the responsiveness to customer. I'm just trying to understand the framework, because we're talking a lot about teams figuring out things from customers themselves. Surely learning from a customer is a good idea, but at what level of the organization? Here it seems like there is an autocratic.
Well, in a way, I mean, if you just think about Scrum, we want to have a chief product owner for a product.
So he's the one.
And he's the chief product owner. Steve Jobs was chief product owner at Apple. Now, the characteristics of a chief product owner is they spend at least half the time with the product, which Steve Jobs did. Elon spends more than half the time. He spends about 80% of his time with the product. Bill Gates filled that same function. At one point, he said, I'm going to be the chief application architect. He spent over half his time really working on the architecture of products of Microsoft. So this has turned out to be a very good model for, in fact, I work with a venture capital group over at New Venture Partners, and they like the Steve Jobs model. If they can get the CEO of the startup to be like a Steve Jobs, they prefer that. So it's interesting the way Scrum is set up. I was meeting with a Russian in St. Petersburg. He took me out to lunch. He was running this huge company. And he says to me, Jeff, he says, you know, Scrum gives power to the people. We tried that in Russia. It caused a lot of problems. But he said, the product owner is the czar of the product. We can live with that. He takes a swig of his vodka. And that's the way Scrum is. It's not a democracy. And that's one of the reasons it's so effective. So many of these so-called Agile frameworks will never be effective because they don't have that strong focus and accountability on the product owner's side, and the system set up around the team that is data-driven to deliver 10x on performance, which is the way Scrum was built as a technology innovation. I had done many before. I was brought into a company to do this. I knew it had to be 10 times as good as any other way of working, because that's the way it is in startups, right? If your product's not 10 times better, you'll never make it. And usually investors won't invest. So Scrum was designed to be 10x, and we had the best productivity company in the world, and they're benchmarking it the whole time we're formalizing it. And only when it was 10x was it ready. And as soon as we launched it with a product, we guaranteed every customer, you will double productivity in the first month or you get your money back. And we still give that in the Scrum courses. We give a money back guarantee. You come to our course, you implement what we tell. If you don't double your productivity in a couple of sprints, you get your money back from the course. We've never had to give any money back, not for Scrum and not for the product that we launched.
But we do have to declare, if this was a CNBC show, it's not, that Jeff is a shareholder in Tesla. Just making it clear. We're going to do questions in batches of 3, so please introduce yourself. Let's take questions in batches of 3 and get as many of them in as possible. Sultan, you had your hand up first, and then we go to 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3.
So coming from Athena, post-merger with GE's legacy healthcare business, I'm just really curious, like, what happened at GE, and like, why didn't they stay agile, or, you know, can you tell about what your time was like there, and what happened after?
So we're going to do them in 3. So we got a question on GE.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Andrew. So it's interesting you talked about the example with Tesla and Apple, where there's a very clear product czar or whatever it is. We heard from about Ricardo's, where it sounds like more of a democracy what are the elements of Agile that are critical, and what are the elements that actually can change depending on the context?
We will take one more question, sorry.
Two quick questions. First one is, where do I sign up for the Tesla giveaway? The second one is, I run a couple like software development teams, and we run Agile by default. But what I found is sometimes a Gantt chart where like everyone can see kind of like the interlocking dependencies actually helps the team move faster. So like, how do you reconcile that with?
Okay, so 3 questions. Gantt chart, what's critical to Agile and not, and the GE story.
Okay. So I came into, GE acquired a company called IDX. IDX was twice as large as GE Healthcare at the time. So IDX effectively became GE Healthcare. So I was hired in as a CTO of IDX in 1996. The day I came in, the stock price went up 6%, and it never stopped going up the whole time I was there. As soon as I got there, I said, I got the management team together, about as big as this group. I said, we have to make Scrum. Here's how Scrum works. If you're a manager, you're some kind of leader. If you're a leader in Scrum, you're some kind of Scrum Master. Figure out how the organization be structured. We're going to deprecate the management job description. And they did that. The principle I set up initially, the primary principle is the second value in the Agile Manifesto. You deliver working product every sprint. So as we started to boot up, hundreds of teams, I said, we don't have time to try to figure out why teams don't work. Either the team delivers working product the first sprint, or it's disbanded. So that's one of the primary things that has to work. Second, as we scale, and we have groups of teams clustered, and we call Scrum of Scrums. That Scrum of Scrums set of teams, their job is also to deliver an increment every sprint. So that Scrum of Scrums is a delivery team. This is fundamental now to Scrum at Scale. It's written into the Scrum at Scale guide. For Scrum itself, we pointed out, for every team, there needs to be a clear product backlog. This is true in any process. It's independent of Scrum. It needs to be clear what people are doing. It needs to be in the right priority order. It needs to be set up in a way that's going to deliver value, and the product owner needs to be measured by value delivery. And for those of you who heard Mark Pincus, I was on the management team that acquired Mark Pincus's company in 1995, just before I joined IDX, for $27 million. We launched Mark, and I introduced Scrum into IDX. And Mark did a really good talk about how to prioritize the backlog in a way that gives you, big jumps in functionality. So getting that backlog right, I don't care what process you're doing, if you don't do that, you're going to lose. As you come into a sprint, an iteration, the team has to be really agreed on what they're going to do. And in Scrum, we call that sprint planning. Again, everything in Scrum is something every key thing in Scrum is something that has to happen. It's independent of Scrum. We give it a name for people to talk about. But if people don't come in the morning and know exactly what they're supposed to do this week in priority order, what happens? We were asked to audit 1,000 developers at GE in Silicon Valley. We found out they were supposedly doing Scrum. We found out 300 team members were doing stuff nobody wanted. Because of bad product ownership, they were making up their own stuff. We find that in every single big company we go in. 30% of what they're doing should not be done. We have to fix the product ownership. Not only that, 65% of what's left are features that never or rarely will be used. We have decades of data on software, we're collecting we see the same thing in hardware. So if you can eliminate the 30% that's just total waste, and then eliminate the 65% of features, there's only 25% of the teams working on stuff that really matter. If you can get focused on that, what happens to your production? It goes up by 400%. You can get twice the work in half the time by just not doing stuff. But you have to have good product ownership, and you have to have good sprint planning. Now, coming into the sprint, we know even in a waterfall team, if they meet every day and check in, they get amazing results. So this daily meeting, again, is independent process. You get much better results if you have that daily meeting just to check in, make sure everybody's on the same page, and we're driving towards a common objective. At the end of the sprint, we want the second principle in the Agile Manifesto. We review the working increment. If you don't have that, you're in big trouble. 80% of the teams I've checked in with in Silicon Valley don't have that. So there's a lot of bogus Agile out there. That's one of the big problems. The Department of Defense created this Defense Innovation Board with many famous computer people, and they put out this document called Agile BS. Has anybody read it? It went viral in the software world because the law in the United States says all DoD software projects must be Agile. So every vendor is proposing an Agile project. So the Defense Innovation Board has said, here's 20 questions. The first one is, do they have shippable product every sprint, including the first sprint? If they don't have that, that proposal should be thrown in the trash can. It's Agile BS. So there's a whole bunch of bogus junk out there. You need to be alerted to that. And so at the end of the sprint, it's when we have to call the sprint review, there's stuff that actually works so that users can use that. And then there's a retrospective to deliver a process improvement in the next sprint. And at Toyota, they call this the Kaizen. And if you're not implementing the Kaizen, you're not improving. And you'll get teams that are flatlined forever. And so to get continuous improvement, you have to have that process. So these 5 things I mentioned, every single so-called Agile process has to execute on those 5 things or they will suck. And there's a lot of sucking teams out there, unfortunately. Okay, so where are we in the question?
We can do one more round. Let's get in. Any more questions? We have. Please go.
Oh, okay. You talked a bit about like lean manufacturing principles. Can you talk a little bit more about how that relates to Scrum and Agile? Like, is Scrum a new iteration off Lean? Are they complementary tools, or how do they work together?
Any other questions? No, we go, please.
I'm curious what the gap to bridge, or maybe the predictable challenges that we'll face going from, talking about Scrum and Agile for a few days to putting it into practice. It strikes me that the stakes are pretty high, especially if you're practicing a new way of working with a team, just in terms of getting a confidence and buy-in that it's not always the best thing to learn by doing it, by practicing. So maybe you can save us some of the pain of the common mistakes.
So Lean versus Agile, common mistakes, please.
Yeah, thank you for being here. We have heard a lot of criticism on Gantt chart today, so I just want to hear a little bit more. What's your opinion whether there are still some industries or companies in which traditional project management is still taught?
And given we're on the last round, we've got 2 more. We're just going to push the boundaries, right?
Yeah, so if you're an individual within a company, how many teams can you be a part of? Or can you only be part
That's
of?
easy, 1.
But then, if you're a talent or a resource that can be leveraged for more than one thing, still, you just stick to that.
Yeah. So I'm on a team, and Noah is my product owner, she here? No, she's back there. And I have to do something with everybody. I have customers that want me to do stuff. I have teams that want me to do stuff. And anybody that wants me to do stuff, I hand that to Noah. She then creates a backlog of the most important stuff in the most important order. And then I work that backlog. How much more efficient do you think that makes me?
A lot more efficient, but you're part of her team. So she can make the most out of your talent, but another team might need you and they don't even have that opportunity to leverage you.
They can talk to her.
Okay.
You still spend 2 days here.
The research shows that as soon as somebody is on 2 teams, their productivity is cut in half. So given that, it's like this 6-person, 10-person team. The data shows that clearly 10-person is a failure. So you should never, ever, ever do it. The data shows clearly a person on 2 teams loses 50% of the productivity. That's bad. You should never, never, never do it. But it's hard. Some of these things are like cigarettes. They're hard to give up, like timesheets. Can't tell you how wasteful timesheets are, but companies just can't give them up. It's like giving up smoking. You know it's bad for you, but you just keep doing it.
So let's do the 2 questions. We'll save the common mistakes to the end. So Gantt chart, and is that still useful in some context?
The whole project management system is a failed approach. Now, why do I say that? I'll give you 2 data points. 1, the guy that wrote the waterfall method was hired by the Department of Defense to come up with a standard. At the time, 60% of software development was funded by the Department of Defense. He came out with a waterfall plan with a Gantt chart. Everybody had to implement it. By year 2000, they had analyzed billions and billions of dollars of defense projects, and 75% of them had delivered nothing. Now, by the mid-80s, the Department of Defense had figured out that this was a really bad idea, and it has started changing the approach. In fact, Fred Brooks, who you mentioned before, was in charge of the committee that was dealing with this. The guy that wrote that spec was interviewed by the author of one of the Agile books, 10 or so years ago. And he said, well, when I wrote that specification, I really didn't know much about software. I talked to a few consultants, I read a couple of books, and it was a mistake, I'm sorry. So, first of all, this was a mistake. Second, when I got Ken Schwaber involved in Scrum, his brother worked at DuPont, and he said, you must come to DuPont because we've hired the 2 leading people in the world on process management and chemical plants, Ogunaki and Ray. So Ken went down there and met with them, and he described what we were doing, and Ogunaki and Ray started laughing at him, and Ken was embarrassed. He said, why are you laughing? He said, because this waterfall process you're talking about is a predictive process. You assume that things are going to happen, there's going to be very small variation. It's only useful if there's less than 4% variation. How much requirements change during software development? Ken says, over 50%. They laughed even harder. They said, the reason that chemical plants blow up, and that's what we were hired, was applying a predictive control system to a system that has high variability. For that, here's our standard textbook, chapter 12, empirical process control. It's where you look at the system as a black box, you're constantly inspecting and adapting on what's happened. They said, you need to go back to the software community and implement an empirical process control system, or they're going to have projects blowing up for the rest of their life. They thought it was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard of. And these are the leading experts in process control, probably in the world. This was a really bad mistake. And it's hard for people to get over it because there's so much money being made of it. And yet you talk to project leaders, it's so painful. I talked to one at BP Oil. She had 1,000 people. She cornered me at corporate headquarters one day. She said, Jeff, before Scrum, my job was soul-sucking. I worked day and night. I worked weekends. And still everything was late. And they called me the Ice Queen because I was pressuring those 1,000 people to work as hard or harder than I was. Since Scrum, I've got my life back. I'm working a normal work week. We're getting stuff done. My people have been released from slavery. So, for those of you involved in traditional project management, you really need to get a hold of that, because traditional project management is really slave trade. You're trying to turn people into slaves. And the worst thing about it is that it doesn't work. You know, maybe if you can make a lot of money by running them as slaves, it might be worth it, but you can make more money by giving them freedom. So it's just common sense to loosen up.
We had a question on lean versus Scrum.
Yeah.
Evolution, change.
Okay, so the word Scrum comes from Takeuchi Tanaka's paper, The New Product Development Game. And in there, they're looking at lean hardware companies. And they're saying the best teams are working so closely together, it reminds them of the game of rugby and the Scrum formation of rugby. We're going to call that Scrum project management. So Scrum is lean project management. Now, last year we went into Toyota to implement Scrum. We actually have we are the trainers in Japan for the research and development team at Toyota City. Scrum in Japan subsidiary does that. Last year we were in Toyota America. And as soon as we started implementing Scrum, they said, whoa, wait a minute. Scrum is not Kaizen, which is small incremental improvement. Scrum is Kaikaku, which means revolution. Because in Scrum, as you start to make small process improvement, you see that the organization needs to be refactored to go faster. We learned that in software. We learned some interesting things in software that apply directly to organization. And changing that whole organization to take 200 people, reduce it to 20 people, change the way it works, and now it's more than 2,000 times faster. That's revolution. So that's the difference between Scrum and Lean. It is based in Lean, but it has a revolutionary approach. It refactors the organization. It also involves the customer directly in product ownership.
Coming to our last question in the last batch, which was around common mistakes and advice. But I really want to combine it. Jeff is going to be around for a few minutes as we wrap up. So I just want to make sure we respect our timeline. So as we tackle the last question, which was common mistakes and advice, also wanted to bring back to a theme Professor Suraj Srinivasan raised on Scrum and Agile in the personal life. How can some of these tools make an impact in the day-to-day lives of folks? So two things: the personal aspect of it, and any common mistakes as we close up and get to the informal discussion.
Well, the common mistakes is a long discussion, but I'll just say that we think there's many more than 10,000 companies doing agile transformations right now. And Forbes published data showing that 47% of them fail. So there's a lot of failures out there. It turns out if you look at Scrum teams, or so-called Agile teams, we have about the same failure rate. So most of the failures are just caused by not implementing Scrum properly. Of the 47% failing, the MIT Sloan Journal did a study and found that 75% of them are terminal, i.e. the company goes bankrupt or sold off. So that means of the companies, when I went to West Point for the first day, they got us in an auditorium. They said, look to your left and look to your right. One of you is not going to be here by the end of the summer. So the same thing is true right now because of the Agile going on in the world. Look to your left and look to your right. One of you is going to be in a company that's going to be dead within a few years. So this is really serious business. And the reason for death is primarily waterfall leadership, trying to manage an agile transformation. Professor Carter at Harvard, who you guys are going to study, says he has never seen a successful long-term agile transformation with waterfall management running it. So, you know, the first level symptom is bad scrum, but the deeper level is leadership that has the old mentality, they will kill it. So we could spend days talking about this problem, but let's go to the personal side because it's really more interesting. Some years ago, a New York Times reporter came, visited my house. He said, I'm writing a book on happy families. And I'm interviewing Agile people to see how they work in their families. So he wanted to know how we did in our family. So some years ago, my wife is a list person, and she has her honey-do list. Do any of you have honey-do lists? And you know, we're talking about Scrum all the time. She says, we should make a backlog on the refrigerator with the honey-do list. So I said, okay. So we're having coffee Saturday morning. We get the list. You know, there's a bit of an argument about priorities and what's on there. And then we start working on it. I'm getting my stuff done, and she's not getting her stuff done. So now I'm complaining about her. By the end of Saturday, it's all done. And it used to be every weekend, at the end of every weekend, it was never done. And since that day forward, we've never had a problem with the honey-do list. Now, people have taken that and turned it in many different directions. I don't know how many weddings have been run with Scrum. I was at a user group meeting. I asked how many people have run their wedding with Scrum, and 6 people raised their hands. Has anybody done that here? Run the wedding with Scrum? Yeah. We've got a couple of people right in the room here. Okay. Scrum is really useful for, if you really, like whenever I have a whole bunch of things to do, like I have right now, my office at home, there's a backlog on my wall of all the stuff I have to be doing. And I know if I prioritize and get it on that wall, I'll get it done twice as fast. So personally, it's much more effective. You can read studies on user interface design that will explain how the mind works and why that's so important. It's extremely effective for children, particularly for children that have any type of attention deficit disorder. The visualization really helps them. And there's a program called EduScrum. It started in the Netherlands. And the guy that started is an Aikido master, but he teaches chemistry in the high school. And he started to implement Scrum for everything, all the training. And it is amazing. Those kids they're done 6 weeks early with the entire curriculum. On the average, their grades are 20% higher than the same course not doing Scrum. And you're in the class, the level of enthusiasm is unbelievable. The kid said, we can't believe you invented this for adults. It's perfect for teenagers. And one of the kids I met there was autistic. And he said, 2 years, he said, I become a Scrum Master. The kid's now a great communicator. 2 years ago, I couldn't even talk to anybody. But Scrum has enabled me not only to, because I'm such a good visualizer and can really work that Scrum board, I become a leader of my Scrum team. And in order to do that, I've had to actually learn how to talk to other people and explain to them what I'm seeing and what's important. And I'm astounded that this autistic kid is now one of the greatest communicators in the high school. And I found in the business community, the kids that come out of this program, the businesses really want to hire them because they really know how to get stuff done. And those kids, when they go in for a job interview, if they even smell waterfall, they run. They will not work in any environment that's not Scrum because it's a natural way of working. Kids love it. They flower, they grow. Scrum actually helps people be better people. In fact, that's the reason I'm still doing this is because what is needed in the world is for people to take responsibility as a grassroots level and challenge authority about what's going on. Right? I'm teaching people how to be better people and insist that leadership starts protecting this planet, starts helping people instead of using them. I want to make, if you're 10 times faster than what we sell is 10% of the cost, that means those kids in South America can buy sneakers at 10% of the cost. Everybody can have 10 times as much stuff. People need to work less than get it to produce the stuff. It's better stuff, so quality goes up significantly. So this is literally a change the world strategy, and it is working. It is working. It's changing the world. And when enough people get on empowered Scrum teams, I mean, I have several countries where the leadership has told me, and cities like Berlin have told me the government should be run by Scrum because it's the way, the amount of waste. In Denmark, they've done a lot of Scrum in government, and they tell me, Jeff, you know, every project we touch in government, the cost is 10 to 20 times less. They say, you know, this commercial productivity improvement is like nothing. In government, 10 to 20x. So this whole movement needs to change the government, needs to change the people, it needs to protect the planet, it needs to help people grow, the children as well as the adults, into better people, more collaborative, cooperative, and helpful. That's the mission. And right now, with Scrum at Scale, my goal is to reinstall a new operating system in every major corporation of the world. And we'll see how far we can get with that. But you guys need to help me, right?
As we draw to the close, we've had a terrific lineup of speakers over 2 days, and this has been a terrific highlight, Jeff. Your contribution has been immense. A round of applause for Jeff. Jeff's team has been very kind. There's a copy of one of the books on Scrum, so please grab a copy on your way out. 10 seconds, quick update for tomorrow. A lot of the themes we spoke about tomorrow will be delved into a little much deeper. We're going to kick off with the Salesforce team, who will start. We have Paul and Laurie here. Please wave. Scrum at scale. 900 teams really epitomizing Agile at scale. So we're going to dig really into it as to what does it take to really ramp things up, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we'll also start digging into some other leading thinkers of Agile in other systems. What we take away from Dr. Sutherland is certainly conviction. Conviction in the methodology and his teachings. And this being the Harvard Business School is for us to interrogate, to question, tomorrow explore what are the approaches, does it work in all circumstances, and continue to ask questions. And I'm also looking forward particularly to the automotive experts that come tomorrow, the Tesla question, and to get further opinions. So with that, we have you around for a few more minutes. Let's continue the questions. Wonderful discussion. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, right.